Hello everybody, welcome back to our latest video on mltruth.com. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Today's topic is going to be interpreting the Bible. This is a topic that I take very seriously because a lot of times when people come to me with objections about the Bible, they tell me that because there's so many different interpretations, so many different ways you can see a certain verse or passage, it's led to so many different denominations and it just can't be true. Well, that logic doesn't really make too much sense, but I can shed some light on how to interpret it the right way, or what I think is the right way, or the best way. And what I mean by that is when you interpret the Bible, first of all, you can't just take one verse and one sentence and then come up with this entire doctrine off of that one verse. I mean, you have to look at the entire passage, the entire chapter, and maybe even the entire book itself, just to figure out what was being said and why it was being said. And an important example of this would be when Paul writes his letter to the Romans. It's important to understand what was going on in Rome at that time. It's important to understand why Paul was writing this letter, and it's also important to understand the society and the culture of Rome at the time. And until you understand that and understand what was going on in history at that point in time, then you can't get a 100% accurate interpretation of that book. And it does help to understand history, the culture, what was going on in society at the time, the mindset of the person that was actually writing it. For example, when David was writing a lot of the Psalms, he was under a lot of stress in some cases, and sometimes he was very depressed. Sometimes he might have been overjoyed, and that determined how he wrote some of the Psalms. And it's very important to understand that and not just look at one passage or one verse and, just come up with all these different interpretations. Another thing that's important is understanding when something is supposed to be taken literally or when something is supposed to be used metaphorically. What I mean by that is there are some verses in the Bible that are quite literal. For example, do not murder. That's a literal verse. I don't think there's too many different interpretations of that one. And then there's other ones that are used metaphorically. For example, one of my favorite verses is with the mustard seed of faith, you can move mountains. Now, I don't really think that you can go out and move an entire mountain. I think what's really meant by that is that with a mustard seed of faith, you can accomplish anything, no matter how big it is. No matter how big the task is, you can accomplish it. And I believe that's a verse that's a metaphor. And I really think it's important to understand a lot of those things when it comes to interpreting the Bible. When you do all that, when you look at the history, when you look at society, when you look at the culture, when you look at the mindset of the person that was writing it at that time, when you look to see if it's supposed to be a metaphor or a literal translation, you can interpret the Bible the best way. I want to thank everyone for watching. Be sure to tune in for our next video and our next article on mltruth.com. Thanks everybody. Have a good one. God bless.
I'll just say to you, do you know that we did this all day? Like working on mltruth.com? Let me just say to you, you know how much we just love baking cookies, me and my mom.